Hey, I'm Decathlon Gamer, and welcome back to Zwift, a fitness journey. Today, I'm going to take another quick ride, another quick tour of one of my favorite movie franchises of all time. So, a couple quick coming at you things, because I'm still quite busy these days. Got a new outfit, trying to get in with what I should be wearing for this type of thing. So, we'll see how that part works out. I got a few in all, one of them still on the way. First two have arrived, so try out the other one. Feels a little different. Not normal clothing for sure. Pads, especially with the pants, feel strange. Anyway, let's get to it. By the way, what we're talking about today, Star Wars. Definitely one of my all-time favorite fantasy series. Let's go ahead and get right to it while I try to cruise and see if we can get a couple laps in around Richmond. Short laps. I'm going to begin my discussion not in the order in which the films were made, but the order in which they were filmed. And so that takes us to episode 4, A New Hope. Of course, anybody who's seen the series knows that sequence and kind of the basis behind it. But let me get into why I'm okay with that one being the one that was filmed first. First of all, in terms of the first two trilogies, the prequel and then of course the one we observed first, from a cinematic standpoint, it makes a lot of sense that George Lucas had picked that trio, that trilogy, with New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. That, due to the fact that in the late 70s, early 80s, that storyline fit a little bit better culturally than the prequel trilogy did. And it fit the time. But I think really the biggest factor of all for me is if you look at A New Hope, we have a giant Death Star, yes. And that's a big thing. And we do have a few large ships in space. In terms of graphical representation of those, on the kind of budget that Lucas was operating with, that versus episode 1, where you have the pod racing and the ships, and you have so much more going on in episode 1 than you do in episode 4. The level of detail capable in 77 on the budget that Lucas was constrained by in 77, it makes a million times more sense to have gone with episode 4 and never expecting it to blow up the way it did. I mean, from what I've heard, he wasn't entirely sure they were going to get beyond a single film of the series anyway. There was questions if that would ever happen. Also, had he started with episode 1, would it truly have been as iconic and influential as Star Wars ended up becoming? Maybe not. Their sci-fi was a dime a dozen in the 70s. It was everywhere, but it was always low budget. It was always cheap. It was never mainstream. Certainly not to the extent that A New Hope just blew up, and that clearly was not on the cards. I was not expecting of it. So I'm totally fine with that decision. Now, of course, that decision would later add some complications to the series. Some people, like myself as a teenager, were unaware at first that we were dealing with a prequel. Kind of blew over my head. I was fairly young, and while I was a fan, that fandom grew as I got older, grew as an adult, and so as a child I didn't fully grasp that, and my parents were fans, but not to the extent that I was a fan. And again, I wasn't die hard as a fan as a child, so all of that was an evolution for them and for me and my family as a whole. The last trilogy, we watched each and every one in the theater. In fact, Rise of Skywalker might be the last film that I've seen in the theater because, well, that was, what was that, 4 months before lockdown started, and obviously I haven't seen anything since then. In fact, a lot of our local movie theaters don't even exist anymore, let alone waiting, biding their time until they get a chance to reopen. Most of them don't even exist. I have a feeling, just while we're on that subject, a little tangent here, I have a feeling that the movie business is going to be very, very different, and the model that Netflix has, that has been absorbed by others, Amazon, Hulu, as a couple strong examples. Streaming services, HBO Max, streaming services are going to take over the movie industry. There might not be movie theaters anymore. You might not have that experience, at least not in the way we know it now. Very well could be something totally different on the other side of this pandemic. That being said, back to this. Loved A New Hope. What a fantastic story. And then The Empire Strikes Back. That's Toth, right? Oh gosh. I'm not perfect in my Star Wars lore, but fairly well versed in it. Anyway, I want to say that that's Toth, where they open up the ice planet, and cool storyline with that. But otherwise, for me, Empire Strikes Back is actually one of the weaker ones of the 9. Obviously, diehard fans just adore the original trilogy and don't feel the same about the follows. Now, Return of the Jedi was fantastic, in particular for me. So 83 is when Return of the Jedi came out. And of course, we had the couple spin-offs that, for whatever reason, Star Wars, it's not officially locked into the world of Star Wars, but you had those 2 Ewok movies that came out in the few years after that. Well, okay, so here's the thing. First 2 movies, filmed before I was born. I was born a year after Empire Strikes Back came out, so I didn't miss it by much, but they were already out. They already had their day. It was release on video that I was first introduced to Star Wars. And by that point, obviously, I was not a toddler when I saw my first Star Wars film. So it had been some years since that whole trilogy had come out. But then all of a sudden we had that whole trilogy. But I want to say that release on tape was somewhere right around that time frame where those 2 Ewok movies came out. And as a young child, just old enough to see Star Wars, those Ewoks were freaking adorable. And I one of those 2 movies anymore, and I want to say it's the Endor one, right, where they're on the moon. Crap, I love that movie so much as a child. It was easily one of my favorite movies. Much more so than the 3 Star Wars movies themselves, because of the Ewoks. Again, little kid at the time. Now, I totally outgrew that. I haven't seen that movie in decades. I'd love to check it out again. Obviously, it's gonna have the nostalgia, but it's not gonna be the same thing, because obviously not a child anymore. Well, anyway, that trilogy was good, and I liked it. There was other things I liked more. Indiana Jones. I was a massive fan of Indiana Jones. Star Wars, I liked. Star Trek, I liked. There was other things that I liked. But each time I rewatched them, and they were the type of films that, while my parents also weren't huge fans, my sister wasn't a huge fan, we all liked it. So it was one of those things that we played a lot. Not because we were massive fans, but because none of us disagreed with it as a choice. And when you've got a cabinet full of 40 films and 30 of them have somebody disliking it, when you're looking at options, 3 of the 10 being Star Wars and 3 of the 10 being Indiana Jones, and I'm rounding numbers off here, I don't know what the exact count would have been, but they got played. Both of those trilogies got played frequently. So in time, seeing it again and again and again, the impact just got a little bit bigger. I didn't get sick of it. I fell more in love with it. So then in 99,
I'm in high school, and of course, the reaction to a character like Jar Jar Binks as the weak point. Choice in actors was not, at least across the board, was not the best choices. But let's be honest here for a second. The production value of the second trilogy, the prequels, was a million times higher than the original trilogy. The technology, totally different 22 years later than what it had been, so the graphics were a million times better, and then of course there was a lot of explaining to do, and a lot of diehard fans were upset that things looked better when timeline was before. Wow. Okay, it was filmed 20 years later on a massive budget compared to a tiny budget. And the original group of actors outside of a certain Harrison Ford, let's be honest, the actors weren't exactly top notch, at least, the main characters that we're talking about. Kids without acting experience doing a low budget film that blew up and then made them into household names. So when we get to the prequels, some of the acting, anyway, was massively improved as we had some good quality names, but of course we still had at least one unknown playing a very, very key role. But we didn't see him in the first one. We saw him from the second one on. And I know there's so much hate directed at both of the second sets of trilogies, the prequel and the recent trilogy. But I gotta say, I don't have hate really for either. Was Jar Jar Binks perfect? Oh, hell no. But does he have my ire? No. He gave me a few good laughs. He was okay. There's been better characters, but he was okay. Was Hayden Christensen that bad of an actor? No, actually, I don't think he's that bad. Could they have gotten somebody better on that budget? Oh, absolutely. But we've also seen what being an actor in Star Wars does to a career. You become typecast immediately. You only get seen as one thing the rest of your life. And very, very few actors have escaped that. Harrison Ford is obviously the best example of somebody who was able to escape that mold, that typecast. Well, anyway, I was okay, and I was at an age where the more family friendly approach. I was a teenager, but I wasn't a cynical teenager like many teenagers will often be, and so I wasn't opposed to them trying to widen the range, and I get it. Their fan base, it had been 22 years since they had seen it. They were kids when they saw it, teenagers mostly, when they had seen it, when the diehard Star Wars fans. So now they were all adults with kids of their own. And I technically fit that mold, but of course, like I said, my parents were fans, but not massive fans. I went into that one open book. I mean, like I said, I went into the prequels not even realizing, at the time anyway, not originally, and certainly not at all through the first film, that there was a connection. Because while I had seen those original trilogies, I was often being a kid and playing, and I wasn't as invested into the characters as you could be, and hadn't watched them for a while. And so it had been a few years, at least, and by the time I sat down to watch that, I did not connect the dots. And you know what? As much hate as there is for the last trilogy, I loved them, and I have very few complaints at all over this last trilogy. For me, I'd say one of my biggest complaints is the casting of Adam Driver as Kylo Ren. I don't care for Adam Driver as an actor. I thought it was a great trilogy, and I have almost no complaints. Was it perfect? No. But how do you keep 9 movies running and still keep people coming back? And we're talking over a massive period of time. And if you remember 2 episodes ago, for my Zwift series here, when I first started talking about the movie franchises, there's a very, very common theme for me. I see 1, I see 2, and I'm like, woo, and then I see 3, and I'm like, I see 4 movies in a series, and I'm just like, I'm done. Been there, done that. The same freaking thing. I lose interest. But I do burn out on franchises, and I do burn out quick. And for whatever reason, not only have I not burnt out on Star Wars, but the depth of my fandom grows and grows and grows in time. So that's a rare feat to accomplish, and it's not just the 9 films. Of course, you have 3 other spin-off films, and then we have like the Attack of the Clones series. Every episode I've seen, I'm definitely a solid Star Wars fan. And while I'm fairly well versed in the lore, like anything out there is not a film franchise, period. I talked about this last time with Lord of the Rings, how I know my stuff relatively well. I know my stuff relatively well with Star Wars. Anyway, let's go ahead and wrap this one up. Yes, I'm a Star Wars fan, and no, I am not so diehard about that original trilogy that I hate everything else about Star Wars, but still love and embrace and watch it anyway. I do enjoy it. I do enjoy it. Like I said, even the most recent ones, really the only issue I had was with Adam Driver, and a couple little plot things. There was a couple holes. They had their issues with bouncing between different directors, different producers, and changes that were forced upon. Sometimes making a film can be difficult, especially when it's one of the highest grossing series of all times. There can be influence on high. Unlike, say, Fast and the Furious, where none of it has to make any sense whatsoever. It's just a big cash cow where cars drive fast and people say stupid little catchy lines. Let me know how. Let me know you. Gosh, words. Let me tell you how I feel. There we go. All right, let's call it.
All right, folks. Well, not a record, as it was a second faster last week, but I was feeling so much faster a week ago. Refreshed, ready to ride. Not that far into the chaos that's been the last 2 weeks. Just 24 hours ago, I was on the verge of passing out. I was so tired, so exhausted, not enough fuel in my body. I had to eat outside of my normal times to refuel a bit. And I'm feeling much better today, but that doesn't mean I'm feeling good. So it felt good now to be able to put in a decent time. 3rd quickest that I've done, and only a second off my best pace, so it's pretty good. I was actually riding in the 21st of 21 gears that this thing has, so that was max effort. Just not max stamina, not max resistance, everything that was going on, but yeah, good. It was good. Felt good. Anyway, hope you liked the discussion of Star Wars. Let me know in the comments below where you stand in the scheme of things when it comes to the great franchise that is Star Wars. And I come across them often enough. I know they're out there, but based on the majority of my audience being male, majority being similar to my age or even older, or at least not far off from my age, I would imagine our generation and that generation above me, that most of us have probably seen all of the Star Wars, or at least most. Well, anyway, that was tiring. By the way, last time, so I don't know if you watched the video in its entirety, last time I finished my ride at 18 and a half minutes, and then like I'm doing now, just rode out a couple more minutes and cooled down, and in doing so I passed that 20-minute mark, and despite that final minute and a half being well off the pace, plus a good 3-4 minutes heading to the circuit that I then ran twice, that combination, I was 1 watt off of my record. So the new wheels, definitely going at a faster pace. Right now I'm cruising, and I'm cruising at 30. Yeah, it's -1, but I used to have a hard time keeping this kind of pace. So it does look like equipment, pretty big factor in Zwift. And so I'm at 123,000 right now on the drops. Probably only need another 40 or 60,000 to get a massively upgraded frame. Definitely looking forward to that opportunity and seeing with my continued progression plus that what I can do with it. That is going to do it for this one though. I'm Decathlon Gamer. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to hit that like button. I'll see you next time. Have a good one. Be safe out there, and bye for now.